Welcome to this explainer. We're going to try something a little different today. We're literally transporting you back in time to pull some real psychological lessons on stress and routine from history's daily grinds. Think about it. Our modern brains are essentially running ancient hardware, right? And we're desperately trying to run high-speed modern software on it. So to figure out how to fix our current burnout, we're looking at how our ancestors handled the daily pressures of life. We're going everywhere from the freezing, muddy fields of the 13th century to the chaotic, grease-stained dining table of a French emperor to unearth what their routines can teach our overstimulated minds. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start off by looking at the stark contrast between our mornings today and the dawn of the past. Today, well, your day likely begins with a jolt of pure anxiety, doesn't it? A blaring digital alarm, instantly followed by an inbox absolutely stuffed with urgent messages, and a closet demanding you make a fashion choice before you've even had a sip of coffee. Now compare that to a medieval village. You woke up slowly, to the gentle, natural creep of sunlight. You put on your one set of work clothes, you just hope the baker had fresh bread. It wasn't glamorous, for sure, and it was undeniably harsh, but it was incredibly, psychologically simple.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the modern stress paradox, peasant life and predictability, Silk Road morning routines, awakening a medieval castle, Napoleon's fast food empire, and wrapping up with historical habits for today.
Starting right off with part 1, the modern stress paradox, and why more choice isn't necessarily better. We live in this era where we constantly feel like we have to optimize our lives. We're told over and over that endless possibilities equal freedom. But developmentally, our human minds were just never built to process thousands of strangers' highlight reels on social media or to make dozens of micro decisions before breakfast. Imagine standing in the pharmacy aisle, completely paralyzed by, 23 different brands of toothpaste? Or staring into a packed closet, wondering why you have absolutely nothing to wear. That right there is the paradox of choice, and it actively exhausts our brains. Over in the medieval village, your biggest shopping dilemma was literally just, hey, does the baker still have bread? You had work clothes and you had church clothes. The sun told you when to start and when to stop. That sheer lack of options freed up a monumental amount of mental energy.
Moving on to part 2, let's talk about peasant life and predictability and the profound comfort of certainty. So let's examine how a tiny, predictable world acted as this incredible shield against chronic mental fatigue. Back then, your world was tiny. It was usually just your village and the woods nearby. You knew exactly how the day, the season, and honestly, your entire career was going to unfold. A medieval cousin didn't need a smartwatch to tell them it was time to wind down. Nature was the ultimate, non-negotiable manager. When the sun went down, work just had to stop. There was no artificial light to let you burn the midnight oil on a spreadsheet. There was no such thing as your feudal lord sending a carrier pigeon at 9:30 p.m. asking for a quick revision to your harvest report. Nature decided when you rested, and your brain was perfectly evolved for exactly that rhythm. This is huge. Unlike today's hyper-independent society, where we try to navigate every crisis entirely alone, a villager's identity was completely rooted in a localized social network. We're talking maybe 100 to 200 people. Survival literally meant helping your neighbor rebuild a roof or pull a wagon out of the mud. If you had a bad day or made a terrible mistake, well, everyone in town knew about it before sunset. Now, to our modern sensibilities, that sounds like an absolute gossip nightmare, right? But back then, it functioned as an inescapable emotional safety net. You completely belonged. You knew with absolute certainty that you wouldn't face a harsh winter or a crop failure entirely by yourself. That brings us to part 3, Silk Road morning routines and mastering the art of organization. Let's travel east for a minute, right to the freezing deserts of Central Asia, to see how merchants survived a super high-stress environment through collective routine. Because if you think your morning commute is tough, try coordinating hundreds of people and animals before dawn. Hundreds of diverse travelers, from Chinese merchants to Persian traders, synchronized their mornings perfectly so they could outrun the merciless afternoon heat. They were awake at 4 a.m. in the biting, freezing wind, eating a really quick practical breakfast of dates and flatbread by 4:30. By 5 a.m., they're loading these groggy, complaining camels in the pitch black. And look, there were no digital calendars or alarm clocks here. They woke up because thousands of years of survival instincts taught them that conquering the morning hours was literally a matter of life and death. In a harsh desert where a single broken chest of porcelain could wipe out an entire year's profit, extreme organization wasn't just some corporate buzzword, it was absolute survival. Every animal, every crate, every traveler had a highly specific place. You couldn't just casually throw a bag of heavy spices onto a camel unevenly. Why? Because the animal would stumble and your entire livelihood would shatter on a rocky mountain trail. Think about how modern chaos, a disorganized inbox, a constantly cluttered desk, zero daily plan, how that drains our mental energy and steals our time. For the Silk Road traveler, routine prevented disaster. Chaos was just way too expensive to afford. Which leads us perfectly into part 4, Awakening a Medieval Castle and the Architecture of Purpose. A medieval fortress was basically a community that required intense, specialized cooperation just to wake up. It operated almost like a giant, breathing stone machine. Long before the lord of the manor even stirred in his bed, this castle was springing into action. First, the night guards swap out at the freezing gatehouse. Then comes this deafening clank of the iron portcullis being meticulously tested, followed by the heavy scraping of massive oak gates opening to the town. Inside, shivering servants are racing against the biting cold, lighting dozens of stone hearths, using embers they carefully saved from the night before. Meanwhile, the kitchens are already sweltering, prepping massive amounts of bread and ale. Just one failure in this chain, and hundreds of people feel it immediately. The beauty of this is that every single person inside those stone walls woke up with clear, unambiguous duties. Scribes carefully recorded grain supplies. Blacksmiths fired up their forges to repair horseshoes. Masons fixed cracks in the curtain wall caused by the winter frost. And the master cook directed the kitchens like a battlefield commander. This environment provided an incredible, rock-solid sense of purpose and consistency. Contrast this with, say, a modern 20-something, endlessly scrolling through LinkedIn, totally paralyzed by an identity crisis over infinite career options. In the castle, you weren't waking up wondering what your life's passion was. You knew exactly who you were, what your trade was, and how your specific job kept your entire community alive. Now let's skip ahead a bit for part 5, Napoleon's fast food empire, aka the original hustle culture. So we're jumping forward a few centuries to explore a guy who possessed immense, world-altering power, but who suffered from the exact same multitasking fatigue so many of us feel today. Napoleon Bonaparte basically invented the original hustle culture. 10 to 15 minutes. That is the astonishingly low amount of time it took the Emperor of the French to finish an elaborate dinner. Can you imagine the absolute despair of his world-class culinary team? While other aristocrats lingered over 2-hour banquets discussing philosophy and art, Napoleon treated a meal like a NASCAR pit stop. He'd literally swallow his food whole and be up from the table, pacing the room, before his guests had even finished unfolding their napkins. He treated meals purely as fuel, nothing more. He would actually dictate complex military orders to panicked secretaries between bites of roasted chicken, completely ignoring these intricate sauces his chefs spent hours preparing. He constantly abandoned half-finished dinners just to run off and plan a military march. And the result? Well, the supreme irony here is that the man who conquered the European continent could not conquer his own stomach. His physicians were constantly begging him to slow down because he suffered from agonizing chronic indigestion and terrible acid reflux. It's really the ultimate historical warning, isn't it? Even emperors couldn't outrun the physical toll of chronic stress, multitasking, and a flat-out refusal to respect basic human biology. And that brings us to our final section, part 6, Historical Habits for Today, and how we can borrow the best of the past. So what does this all mean? How do we actually apply these ancient survival mechanisms to our hyper-connected digital lives? Look, let's be super clear. If someone offered you a one-way ticket to the 13th century, your very first question should be, wait, can I bring my antibiotics? We definitely do not want to romanticize the past or go back to an era of famine, plague, and terrible sanitation. No way. But we can perform a sort of psychological heist. We can intentionally steal their most protective mental habits, leave the dysentery behind, and definitely keep our modern indoor plumbing. Here's a blueprint for modern sanity, drawn straight from history. First, we need to spend more time outdoors in natural sunlight to properly set our circadian rhythms, exactly like the peasants did. Second, we need to move our bodies naturally, maybe walking to the store instead of driving. Third, we absolutely must build physical, local communities we can actually rely on. Think about joining a local neighborhood club instead of just arguing with strangers on a subreddit. Fourth, embrace those boring, predictable daily routines to completely eliminate decision fatigue. And lastly, most importantly, unitask. Put the phone in another room while you eat dinner. Seriously, don't be Napoleon. Just accept that life, at its core, is always going to be a little unpredictable. Ultimately, we have to ask ourselves a pretty big question. Are we measuring our lives by how endlessly busy we are, or by how fully we experience the ordinary, quiet moments? The medieval world, the desert merchants, and even the frantic emperors of the past remind us that human beings simply weren't designed to live with thousands of tiny digital worries following them every single waking hour.
So I encourage you to log off, step outside, and for just one afternoon, let the sun dictate the rest of your day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope it helps you find a little more peace in your own routine. Catch you next time.